Really good. I mean, I actually said to you before the game that I've had those weeks where the season's not quite over. You may have be out of the league and lost the league and you go out of the Champions League. But anytime you go out of the Champions League, whether you're going for the league or not, it's just a real challenge. Just the impact of that, particularly when you feel like you might have a chance of winning it, happened to us many times. And, you know, going into the game, I said that Mikel Arteta will have had a big job in this last few days picking those players up and himself up. Just the emotion of that event, which it is a Champions League semi-final. They didn't quite get there. Paris Saint-Germain get through, and you know it will have taken a toll on them. So I think to come back in the second half like they have was a big moment. It felt like they were just done in the first half. There were signs in that first 5-10 minutes you just couldn't get the legs going. And sometimes it's a warm day. You're away from home at Anfield, one of the most challenging places. Liverpool sharp, making lots of runs forward, and just maybe on the ball they were okay. Arsenal maybe definitely lacking bite up top in the first half, but they certainly looked a little bit leggy getting back. You know, you think about the Robertson sharpness and the alertness on the second goal, just not quite getting back. Saka, Ødegaard, and I think it was Saliba not getting across. Little things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So, yeah, it was a big response, and I don't know how that happened really. So, real credit to Mikel Arteta, because they'll go home tonight, I think now, not joyous, but they'll go home tonight with a little bit of pride and a little bit of feeling that, yeah, okay, let's get ready for next weekend, which is a big game against Newcastle, and it'll give them a little bit of a boost.
What have you made of the narrative around Mikel Arteta since the PSG game in the week? There have been some prepared almost to ridicule him, which seems crazy. The extent to which falling just short is so brutally considered by some to be failure, and his reaction to that, the words he's had to say in press conferences and so on.
He's the manager of a huge football club, and there's consequence when you get knocked out of a Champions League game late on, and there's a consequence when you're not in a league title. There will have been ridicule back in the day against Chelsea's Mourinho teams when they didn't get through to the Champions League final, or our Manchester United teams. It's just what you have to expect, and I think that he made some emotional statements and comments after the game, like we were the best team in the competition, which I'm sort of going to ignore and probably accept that when a manager is feeling such deep disappointment that he doesn't quite come out with maybe the right statement and the right assessment of things. He doubled down on it again on Friday, and probably has to, which I don't blame him for either. I played under a manager that doubled down on his statements as well. But they weren't the best team in the competition. I think the other three semi-finalists were all better than Arsenal, but that's not really a criticism, because I think Arsenal are a team that maybe are knocking at the door, and you know, we knocked at the door 5, 6, 7 times before we finally got there. And I think that's what Arsenal's owners, I think it's what Arsenal's fans believe, that they've got a manager who's on a journey, who's progressing, who's getting nearer. And he did make some statements that you thought, not quite sure that's correct, not sure that's the accurate reflection of the current moment, but then being knocked out of a competition like that in a way in which he will feel, and not being involved in a title race, will bring him huge disappointment and an emotional reaction, and we just have to put it down to that. I think I was happy on Friday when he did say that they've gone backwards in the league this season. I mean, it's plainly obvious, but there was some, I think, that were hiding behind the injuries, hiding behind the refereeing decisions. I think you just have to admit, when you've been 13, 14 points in the last 2 seasons ahead of where you currently are today, that you've got to, you know, look in the mirror, and the autopsy's got to begin, and it's got to begin at home. You know, you've got to say, what are we going to do next season to change that? You know, I had a lot of confidence in Arsenal this season, but they have left themselves woefully short up top. You know, seeing Mourinho up front in the game on Wednesday night, you know, it was inadequate later on in the game when they needed those goals to reply. And obviously they have Havertz, they have Jesus. I'm not quite sure you ever saw Jesus as being the answer anyway. But they've only signed one centre-forward in 7 years at the club, and I know people will keep saying, well, where are they? But in 7 years, you've got to be able to find more than one, and Arsenal have been pretty smart with recruitment. So, yeah, I think they've left themselves short in that department. Maybe they thought Raheem Sterling could be the person to step up and fill that gap as a third striker. Other clubs have players. We've seen Luis Diaz today play up top. He's not necessarily a centre-forward, but Salah, Diaz, Gakpo can all play through the middle. I actually think in the last half of this game, Martinelli showed he actually could be a real dangerous centre-forward with his runs in behind, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think it's been an emotional week for Arsenal, and I think they've just got to look at what they now need for next season to ensure that they don't end up in the same position again. And I said before the game, and it was a compliment, because we've been, I suppose, we've come to a point in football where there's no patience. Everything's very immediate. So to actually be in a good position like Mikel Arteta is, with the belief of his owners, the belief of his fans, and actually the belief of the wider media and football community that he should continue to do this job, having not won a trophy in 5 years, is quite unique. And I think that's because people can see what he's actually building at Arsenal, and it is a patient project. But he will need to come and win a trophy. He will need to win a league title, and I thought that season would be now. I was expecting City to drop off last season, to be honest with you, and they kept going for one last season, and before they had to obviously transition that team, just thought they would fall away, and Arsenal nearly got there, but I thought this season would be theirs. But Liverpool have been far more consistent and reliable, and that's disappointing, and will be really disappointing and hard to take for Mikel Arteta.
So if we believe that Arsenal's number one thing, repair, is to get a top-class striker, how do you read the market this summer? Because there are only so many strikers in the world who are good enough to improve Arsenal or Chelsea or Liverpool or any one of the other, Manchester United, any one of those clubs that want them. And they can't all have whoever this magical person is.
No, we look at the obvious, don't we? Everyone mentions Isak or they mention Gyökeres. But you see Paris Saint-Germain play without an obvious striker in their team. You know, Dembele's played up top for them, and you watch Liverpool today play with Luis Diaz. We've seen City over the years with that, you know, when Haaland's not playing, play without an obvious striker. I've sometimes seen players up there that you think, well, how are they doing it? But, you know, Mikel Arteta's got to find a way. I think it's bloody hard work playing football without a centre-forward. I mean, I've said this many, many times in 13 years at Sky. The goalkeeper, I think, is the most difficult position on the pitch. Number 2 is centre-forward, because I think if your centre-forward and your goalkeeper play well, you've still got a great chance of winning a football match, no matter what happens in between that. And to not have a recognised striker in the squad. You know, Havertz is half a striker, Jesus is half a striker. They can play there, but they do need one or two other forwards that can really be people who can sort of play that line and lead that line. I actually thought, like you say today, Trossard did okay. You know, Martinelli did well in the second half, but they're makeshift in that position, and you can get away with it maybe for a few games. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 25-30 goal striker, by the way. You know, it's not going to be Olivier Giroud, but it needs someone up there who can play the position, who knows how to bring other people into play, who can sort of link with Ødegaard, who can make those sort of connections with the wide players. And they do need another forward as well, so they need 2 forwards. One's got to be more of a central strike, and one's maybe one that can come from wide but be a goal threat. And then I think they do need that midfield player, which it looks like they targeted Zubimendi. So, no, Arsenal aren't in a bad position, but this is a drop-off. This is a season whereby they should have been there. They should have planned for being there. And, yeah, they've got to get that right this summer. You know, it's right that Mikel Arteta is believed in, that he's, you know, given further sort of, if you like, funds to develop. And I think there's another thing at play here, not necessarily with Arsenal, but I think we're going to see more and more managers keep their jobs for delivering their revenue targets, which is Champions League football. Trophies are important, but getting Champions League football is critical now to these clubs. And we saw Arsenal before under Arsene Wenger for quite a long period without a trophy keep his job because he was delivering Champions League football. I think there is an element of that as well, that he's delivering a solid performance. But I think he is proud, Mikel Arteta. He will want a trophy to go with that solid performance that he's got. And he'll be hoping, the Arsenal fans will be hoping, that's next season.
Arsenal legend singles out who's to blame for another trophyless season. Ars legend Ian Wright has made it clear that he has to point a finger at the club's recruitment for the disappointment of another trophyless season. The Gunners were knocked out of the Champions League semi-finals last night as Paris Saint-Germain won the tie 3-1 on aggregate. Wright is not blaming Arsenal's players or manager Mikel Arteta, but stated his view that the recruitment wasn't good enough last summer. It ended up being a quiet window for Arsenal, with Ricardo Calafiori and Mikel Merino doing well, but not necessarily ever looking like becoming starters. Meanwhile, there was then a bizarre late move for Raheem Sterling on loan, which hasn't worked out well at all. Arsenal legend demands big summer from the club. Wright says it now needs to be a big summer for Arsenal, as they're not too far away from going all the way in the big competitions. The Kroenke family will likely be the subject of fan wrath, as they often have been, but there'll also be an eye on what new sporting director Andrea Berta can contribute. We literally couldn't bring anyone off the bench to help that game in the semi-final of a Champions League, Wright said on his podcast. That is the only thing that I will point a finger at in respects of the recruitment, and this is why I'm hoping that Andrea Berta has got his book out and he's ready to go, because we are 3 or 4 players away from winning the league and winning the Champions League. Mikel Arteta surely running out of time to deliver a trophy for Arsenal. As much as Arteta has widely been acknowledged as doing a great job to make Arsenal competitive again, it's surely time to bring in some silverware to show for it. Everyone can see that AFC have been superb in the last 3 years, but fans want to see trophies, and next year might be the one where the pressure is really on for Arteta to deliver. The Spanish tactician won the FA Cup early on in his reign, but they've just not quite been able to get over the line in a couple of Premier League title races. Arsenal's board are unmoved on the future of manager Mikel Arteta. Sources can confirm, despite some supporters left frustrated by another trophyless season and amid claims the Gunners would be better sacking the Spaniard and appointing a big-name alternative. On Wednesday night, Arsenal crashed out of the Champions League semi-final against Paris Saint-Germain, losing 3-1 on aggregate, leaving some fans frustrated by another season without silverware, which now means the Gunners have not lifted a trophy since the FA Cup in 2020. It was hoped the club would have secured a major piece of silverware by now, but sources there have no doubt they are extremely close to achieving that and remain very much behind the 43-year-old as a result. Indeed, sources state those on the Gunners' board feel they are within touching distance of a trophy under Arteta and will give him the support needed to secure silverware in North London. To that end, Arteta will undoubtedly remain at the helm at Emirates Stadium and will do so with unwavering support, sources have confirmed to Team Talk. They affirm the board's resolute backing, dismissing any whispers of job insecurity.